All right. Okay, we're on. So hello, I'm Randy
All
Wise.
right, so go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourselves, how you got started and everything.
Uh,
Okay, I'm Keisha Wise. I'm Randy's wife, and you can go ahead and
and
talk
I'm
more. So
Randy.
he's the writer.
Well, I'm one of
Okay.
the writers.
Well,
So
amongst between us.
so we're all
Yeah.
here for different reasons, I suppose. Anyway, I'm sorry. So I'm Randy Wise. I'm one of the three wise swans. Funny enough, because of how this all worked out, we all are online as well. So and my brothers
Yeah.
on the screen are Jerome Wise and Richard Swan. Sorry, I forgot the guy's name. So and yeah, so we've been writing for a different amounts of lengths of time. Myself, I've been writing probably consistently after high school, I mean consistently since about 2005. And in terms of the idea of book creation, well, that's sort of Swan's fault. He invited me to write a story with him. Although I loved writing, I never wrote anything in particular. Other than stories, on the side, I did a comic, what do you call it? Comic strip years ago in high school. I created a comic strip,
Uh-huh.
which would later become the basis of my original book, Noise Story. But anyway, what was it called? Mishaps or something. So I always wrote like comic strips. I come from a cartoon background, comic books, and all that sort of stuff. So that was an early interest of mine. But Swan invited me to write a story that we were discussing earlier, and that really launched me. And we started on a website called All Poetry, and we were writing on there. So we write separately and we write together. So I've been writing up to that point. And again, once we cover the information between the three of us, separate from me and my wife, then I'm sure they'll add more information as well. Uh, and I
Yeah.
guess so. Coming down to me and Keisha, like our book.
Well, this is actually not even our first book. The way I kind of got roped into writing with Randy is
roped
that
in.
sort of when he and I got married in 2009, we wrote a book together in the same similar fashion that
Yeah.
he and Swan had written a book. He wrote a chapter, I wrote a chapter, and it was just loosely based on our story. And we never published it, but those who have read the manuscript loved it. And so that was our first writing experience together, and really I think my first real writing experience. And then several months ago, sometime last year, I was Rand and I were talking, and I was kind of wanting to reignite some of his writing energy. So I was giving him some ideas of some maybe another children's book that he could perhaps write. And that's how we ended up coming up with A Great Neighborhood. And originally I was just
Yeah.
giving ideas, and I got to throwing out ideas. It just really just evolved literally from throwing out ideas in a conversation. And I started thinking about books that had impacted my childhood that I really loved, and what I feel like what I felt like children needed today. And
Yeah.
one of the things that kind of came to my mind is like, be the parent that you needed. And so I thought about things in my
Yes.
childhood that I thought, I would love if they had been a little different. But I thought about what is that book series, Sweet Pickles, when I was younger. I love Sweet Pickles. I don't know if you remember or heard of Sweet Pickles, but nonetheless, it was about a neighborhood of animals, and it was 26 books because it was based off of the alphabet. There was an animal for every letter of the alphabet. So I forget what A was, but nonetheless, like Walrus, Worrisome Walrus was my favorite. Goof Off Goose was my favorite. And so I thought with Randy, I said maybe we could do something similar to Sweet Pickles. They even had like the picture of the neighborhood in the back binder of the book. And so as a child, you could look and see, oh, this is where Goose lives, this is where Walrus lives, this is where
Yeah.
Camel lives. And it was just really neat. And they had like a hospital and a library. And so I thought like maybe we could make a neighborhood. And with the names, I was really compelled to do something a little different. I again, I thought about my childhood, and in my childhood we did a lot of traveling, and sometimes we would go to different places and would go into the gift shops, and like you would never see Keisha's name, anywhere. My
Yeah.
friend who did a lot of traveling with us, her name was Kimberly, so there were always Kimberly keychains and necklaces.
Right.
So I thought, like, with our book series, we could do A through Z as well, but why don't we give them, some urban and ethnic names? And we wanted a very diverse neighborhood. So, children from other countries, perhaps, or, one little girl who's from the South and, has a really thick Southern accent. And, so that was basically how this idea of a great neighborhood sort of spun off. But I also wanted each story to have a purpose and to have a point, because when you talk to people, adults, everyone has a story.
Yeah.
Everyone has a story. Everyone has had things in their childhood that may have impacted them. So I wanted each story to have a point, from something that we could grow from and we could learn, and help children make better decisions and aim for a good life. And
the way peer pressure happens in the world.
all sorts of things.
So you can tell based on what she said that this was her birth child. She birthed this, and I so she's listed first in the book. Yeah, so I love the idea. She wrote me into to doing the story.
Yeah.
Stories I had traditionally done, especially the ones with my brothers, had been almost entirely funny stories. With imaginary characters, cartoons, and animated, or as it were, animated characters. However, this was a different challenge for me. So I thought, okay, this sounds good. And even when she was saying that just now, I was reliving it again. And it was such a selling point. She wasn't really selling it to me, but she was selling it to me. And so I said, sure.
Yeah.
We started with, as I mentioned earlier, we started with a girl, Keisha. She became the, almost like the template, and then we'll populate the neighborhood. It's an ongoing series. We already published the first two in the series, A Great Neighborhood.
But I think we have like 5 or 6 of them already.
Yeah. So we have several underway. We have quite a few unpublished work.
I love that idea because, as you said, everybody wants to be able to relate to something, especially as kids, the peer pressure to fit in, to be like everybody else, and be pretty and be popular, and like all this is real strong. I seen the effect on my own kids. I mean, my son can just like brush things off real easy, but it took a toll on my daughter. That everybody needs a group, everybody needs to belong. So I really love that idea.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been, again, without telling the story away so much, it's the children are elementary age children. I think up to
elementary and
elementary,
like maybe a little middle school.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten that deep into it, but overall it's elementary school, and they're friends, and they have competitions, and it's a fictitious neighborhood somewhere in America. So we figured they have something. I think I could say this right. Their school buses are not really school buses. They're school buses, but they're like shuttles. Everyone calls them a shuttle because it loops in the idea of technology, a level of technology that we probably don't really have right now. But so we loop some of it in, but it's not really sci-fi, but it's fictional.
Okay.
We have some, it alludes to like high technology. So it's this fantastical neighborhood with lots of beauty and gardens and all this kind of stuff. Funny enough, sister had lived in what is it? Not Ohio. She lived a couple of places. When she was telling me about a neighborhood, as she read part of the story, she said, "Whoa, this sounds like this a real." Though it was fantastical to us, she said it sounds like this neighborhood where she's from, where she had gone to this park that spans almost a city, couple of city blocks, and it just runs through different neighborhoods. And I'm thinking, okay, well, we didn't know about that park. So the kids they all sooner or later know not all of them know one another, but it's sort of fun in that sense. We're hoping to get to that. Now, there are some things in it. What we tried to do, and we don't, we're not done. Again, we're 3 stories in. I don't know how to not say too many things about it, but what we did do is we color coded it. So there's some subject matter that might be, trauma trigger warnings, but not heavy trauma.
I kind of
Oh yeah.
talk about it to a
Yeah.
degree. Like
Well, go ahead.
the first book is Asia Gains Her Confidence. Asia's book actually has 3 stories within
This
the
is
book, and
the,
this is
can you see it?
yeah, wait a minute.
I think you have to get closer.
We're trying to put the book up.
Guess it won't
Maybe
show.
it won't reflect. I think it's reflecting from the
Yeah,
camera.
it's from, oh.
But nonetheless,
Yeah.
it has 3 stories in it. And the first story is about, it's about Asia, who is in about the 5th grade, and she thinks her teacher hates her because Asia doesn't do her homework. Her mother is very kind of unpresent. She gets like the worst grades in class, but long story short, it turns out that Asia really just can't see all that well. And she realizes that her classmate who's sitting next to her can see the board. She can't. Asia goes and has an eye exam. She's introduced to an eye doctor, and he's a Black man. She's a African American young lady, and she's like, wow. She sees the possibility of like, wow, I can be an eye doctor. And then as she's
Oh, okay.
her glasses, she meets the eye doctor who trained the eye doctor who examined her, and she owns the practice. And she's really wild, like, oh my goodness, here's a Black woman who owns this eye doctor practice. And she tells her mom at the end, like, oh, I want to be an optometrist. Her grades get better. Her teacher, who it turns out didn't exactly hate her, she ends up developing, along with the principal, a program where the children have their eyes examined every year, because she realizes a lot of it just stemmed from this child being unable to really see. And funny enough, that loosely my story. I had a teacher 5th grade who it was a new school for me, and I thought this lady just hated me. But in hindsight, as an adult, I got to thinking about that whole school year. I really think this lady was just frustrated because my mother was very unpresent. And this really happened to me. I got glasses. My grades skyrocketed. I went from the bottom of the class to the top, and my confidence I just gained this outstanding confidence, and realized that I wasn't, back then. I mean, I'm pretty sure, children probably thought I was, quote unquote dumb or slow.
Yeah.
Because I literally had a tutor for reading class and for math. I had my own. I would go off, myself and one other young lady. We would go off and we would have our own reading teacher and math teacher in our own little separate session, when I really didn't need it. I just couldn't see. And
Right.
and how do you know what other people see? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I had no idea other people saw better than me, and until I realized that, oh, you can see that and I can't. But and so that was her first story. And then her second story, long story short, Asia's best friend gives her a dog, gives her a puppy. The puppy dies, and Asia's just really upset and depressed, and kind of lashes out some. But with this story, the overarching thing is that many children have lost pets and are grieving. And again, I didn't have an emotionally responsive mother. And so I'm in school and I'm crying, and, I didn't have anyone really to comfort me and help me through that. And except that year, I was in 6th grade, and I have a teacher who impacted my life tremendously. To this day, we keep in touch.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, she helped me through that situation. And then Asia's final story, it's a lot of emotion in Asia's, dog passing away. And then the final,
which is the reason why
and I'm gonna
allow for the trauma trigger. Warning.
I'm gonna get back to it. And so I'm gonna circle around. And her final story is about Asia's best friend who lives across the street. Her name is Micaiah. This story introduces Micaiah's story to a degree, but it also the story is about Asia. Micaiah, a new girl, moves into the neighborhood, and Micaiah and this new girl kind of gel, and they kind of ostracize Asia. But Asia's mother brings it all back together and really helps these girls work through, all 3 of them being able to be friends. But this also introduces Micaiah's story, and Micaiah is, and this story is already written as well. Micaiah is grieving the loss of her brother, who was hit by a car and passed away. But Micaiah's mother is grieving to herself, and she's been unable to work since her son has passed away 2 years ago. Micaiah is not allowed really to talk about her grief, and that whole story is a completely different story, but that does bring in what Randy mentioned, that our stories, we decided to use basically like a traffic light. And on the front cover of the book, it does have, like for Asia's book, it has like red children on the front, which means there's some trauma, there's some difficult, conversations maybe that parents could have with their children as they read these books. And then like Randy had written the second book called Bree at the Center, and Bree's book is yellow because it's not a lot of difficult conversations, some teasing and maybe a little bullying, and so some sensitive things. But each story, like within Asia's book, which again is 3 stories, the first book is a green story because it's really light. It's just about her not being able to see. She gains a confidence. There's nothing really traumatic about it. But the puppy that was traumatic, and
that's a red story.
That's a red story. And the last one actually is yellow, though it introduces it's almost very subtle the way it introduces Micaiah's story. So if you don't pay attention, and by the time you get to Micaiah, you'll kind of miss it. But Micaiah's story is totally a red story. Yeah. Once you get to that.
I love that color coding idea. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We figured that way.
So has writing always been a family thing?
Oh, who was that question, for us? Or for her? I don't know.
Yeah, just
it seems like it was. It turns out we have an aunt who wrote, and she mostly wrote poetry, but she was prolific. We have nieces who write, and so I don't know. We're from a big family, and it turns out other people write as well. But with the 3 of us, my 2 brothers and I, art or artist, some level of writing, art, or anything in between. So we're artistically inclined, which includes writing.
Yeah.
So for the 3 of us, for sure, we've been writing for years. We write together and we write separately. So as you said when you visited the website, it represents our own works, and some of them are collaborative works. But we also have our stuff online as well. So for years, pretty much been writing.
Yeah, I don't know that I ever would have written a thing had I not been inspired by these fellows to do so. But they have inspired me to write even some other things that are still in manuscript and I have not finished. But
and she needs to, because I love it.
Yeah, but I can't say that I would have done so. But I will say I do have a brother who has written, but he's more of a serious writer. He's more he went to school for broadcasting. My daughter, she's in school now with journalism. Apparently my dad also wanted to be a journalist, so a different type of writing for them.
Yeah, that's definitely a different kind of writing. Can we talk a little bit more about the poetry? I love hearing the poetry on TikTok. I tried to write. My son was assigned writing he had to write a poem about himself and things he does. And that was a bit tricky. That's really something, you really have to work on and hone in, just getting the poetry down. Can we talk about that a little bit, the inspiration and what the thought that goes into that?
Sure. Again, for me, poetry was new to me. But when we joined this website, allpoetry.com, I don't know if you can say that, but anyway, it's in our book for sure. We have references to it. And it was experimental, and it still is. And I'm very unorthodox as far as I can tell. I prefer rhyming poetry. Most of my poetry is, a few things don't rhyme, but other than that, it's rhyming poetry. It's mixed genre in the sense that the types of things is some social commentary, but primarily I think the majority of it is nature poetry, and some social commentary in nature poetry. And again, it's sort of what comes to my mind. My online tag was as I think. Someone actually asked on TikTok, what do we come up with names of writers who use a pen name? How do they get that? Well, for me, it came from a book or a phrase, right? As a man thinketh. And so I was thinking of a term. I said, what would I call myself? I need a cool pen name. And I didn't know if I had a cool one or not, but now it's stuck. as I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would sit there and be thinking about stuff, and I said, you know what? As if a person could show up the way they believe themselves to be, then that for me anyway, I said that's kind of cool. And so I thought that would it really was. It felt like it made a cool name for me. So I just
Yeah.
used that over time, and
Yeah.
so I've been using that ever since in terms of where it came from. I thought about stuff, and I end up it spawned the idea that I would have when I would write. That I would say some of the things I would write would come from my thinking tree, my thought lab. I think my brother used the thought lab,
Okay.
and I would say I'm writing from my thinking chair, not tree, my thinking chair. And in truth, it really would be that way. I would sometimes just sit there. I'd be writing it late at night, early in the morning. I'd be one of those people. Now, poetry wasn't the only thing that would do it to me, but on the issue of poetry, I'd be sitting there, let's say driving. For example, I posted my first poem on TikTok, which got hijacked, I guess, and it got muted. But it was about a nature piece, optical illusions. And I was driving, and suddenly I pulled to the side of the road. It's like a really true story. I was overwhelmed by what I was seeing. And so I said, oh my God, I literally pulled to the side of the road and I started jotting down. I mean, once it was safe, put my hazards on. It just felt compelled. And
Yeah.
so because my mind thinks sort of in rhyme, it started it as if it wrote itself. So I put a few little notes and then I got home and completed it. And that has so far always been my
Yeah.
way. And I would call that metaphorically entering into my thinking chair. So as I thought,
Yeah.
wrote. So
Do you keep like a little notebook with you all the time just so you can write things down?
I had for a long time, but I didn't do it nearly as much. Mostly I would have a good memory for that. I'd put a few jots down. That's not it hasn't really ever been my system. Funny enough, my
Oh,
brother could speak to that more, but it was always, I would put a few little notations of something and I would stare at something for a while. Also, like I'm a cartoonist, I use an artist as our background. We all have an art background. And so I would think about things so long that I would be able to hold on to it. Um, so that would be what was going on for me. I would be thinking about it. I kind of have a mental image of it, and then I would write. I would write at a different
yeah.
location. It was okay for me.
Yeah. What advice would you give to younger people, that want to write? Maybe they feel a little shy about it or insecure about what they're writing. What advice would you give them?
I would say write. Just write.
Just do it.
What comes to your mind, and some
Yeah.
people call it brain dump or thought dump. Just write. It's interesting that I had said a while ago, if we have it, we don't know what we have and what we write or do or any art that or thoughts that we contribute to other people. Just do it. If you have a thought,
Yeah.
and you can always refine it later, put it down. It takes some courage, I think, but to actually get there, write down what's going on in your mind, and then look at it later. Even if you get stuck somewhere, write what's on your mind. You can always come back to it later and refine it, but just do it. Just write
Yeah.
it.
And
That's
we've given that advice to, my daughter, just write, just do it and come back to it. And
Yeah.
like you said,
Yep.
refine it. Yeah.
That's probably the biggest thing.
You'd be amazed what you can get.
Exactly.
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I never
And,
ever imagined I had remotely any writing talent, and I guess I might have a smidgen according to these guys, but
She's
yeah.
being modest. I promise you, she's being modest.
And of course, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Mhm.
Yes, that's been the experience.
And I've heard many people, and maybe you feel like this yourself, it's like therapeutic for your own self to get things out. I was taking a psychology class, and the teacher said, for extra credit, write down your life story. And he said, we don't have to share it with anybody, but it helps. And I did. I went through some terrible things too, and I felt so bad afterwards, like couldn't sleep or anything. But then I thought, this would be good later, not only because it pieces together all the things that happened in my childhood that I really didn't think about, until I started writing it and comparing it to my sisters, because even though you go through the same childhood together, everybody's is different. You remember different things, you react differently to things. And I thought, it's like a written record where my children get older and they understand more of like the family dynamics and stuff. They could read my story and understand more of, but yeah, at first it was kind of traumatic, but then I was like, I'm glad I got all that out. you know, put it on paper. Therapy. Yeah.
Exactly. I think this has been very therapeutic for definitely for me, but even with my Kia story, I know for Rand, and I don't want to speak for his brothers, to a degree, some of that story was given voice to some of his family situation, and also trying to give his mother voice in some things that we had talked about and tried to piece together and tried to understand.
Right.
So it definitely, writing is very, very therapeutic, or can be.
You know, it's ironic.
Yeah.
This, and I know, you know, my brother sent me a message to make sure I'm paying attention to how we flow, we transition. So while if that's your thought, to stay with us and then enter the other guys before we move on, did you want, since we're all here, did you have time to go into that later? Because I'll make a comment and then you can. Oh, they aren't saying anything because they haven't been given the green light. That's why they're being so.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
whichever way you guys want to go. Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
perfect. Then I'll say this, and then maybe if you want to respond to it, Keisha or anybody. But that's in staying with that. There's in the second story about Brianna, it flows from that same idea. She's a girl who has she's sort of a bully, right, or a bully, and but like a lot of kids, there's something going on with her, and so that doesn't become apparent until a certain point. But it turns out that writing is a thing she does secretly. So ironically, we thought about that, right? So writing is a thing she keeps herself, but sometimes she shares it. And people tend to know about her writing, and she doesn't use it in the ways that she will eventually get to this place where she blooms, and she'll blossom with her poetry. But she keeps it a secret, but she does use it, and a few people know, like her teacher. And so it becomes a point, it reached a point where we were in the course of writing this, Keisha's my test pilot, so I gave her a sample of it and said, "What do you think?" And when I looked at her and she was wiping her eyes, I said, "Oh shucks, I think it's done." I think it's done. So I said, "Okay." It felt like that was well cooked, and I can turn the fire down and go with that. So Brianna's story, I think it speaks to what you just said. What happens when someone has a set of skills or abilities or know-how or something, but no one says, for example, and these are kids, right? So who says to a child, you can do that, go ahead and use that, and you have the green light? Sometimes kids are, even as adults, but kids are often looking for permission. And so she ends up getting that permission. And so she blossoms.
And even just, I think she also got the green light to really be her true authentic self and not hide behind the facade of being a bully or this little almost a terroristic kid running around just terrorizing everyone, and but to really have permission to let her true self out, and to feel good about it, and to feel good about herself in a different way, and to see that she doesn't have to be this mean child.
So can I love that. Thank you. I'm going to break the recording down. My brother gave me the prompt so that we can keep it so that it's uploadable, and then I'll start it again. How do you feel about that?
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to stop it and then start it again.
I'm going to turn it off.